Welcome to the Cybersecurity and Cloud Podcast, the podcast where we learn from cybersecurity experts how to stay safe, private, and secure on the cloud and in code. CSCP is hosted by Francesco Cipollone, your cybersecurity friend with a passion for all things cyber and sharing stories of other professionals with you. This episode is brought to you by the generosity of Phoenix Security Limited. Phoenix helps startups and enterprises solve complex software security supply chain visibility by leveraging the power of correlation and contextualization. Discover how Phoenix Security helps CISO and security engineers act fast, prevent burnout, and implement DevSecOps at the speed of cloud. Phoenix Security. Correlate, contextualize, and act on risk with one click. Let's dive in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cybersecurity and Cloud Podcast. I'm Francesco, your host, and today we go back to one of my favorite topics that I never talk about it, that is application security. I have as my guest Anshuman, and we've been talking quite a while about the way to develop application security program or approach a first 100 days in a company and how to get about it. And I thought that conversation was particularly useful for everybody. He wrote a couple of blog posts that were very popular about it, and I wrote on the back of that. And I thought, why not share that with the whole community and the whole world? So here you go. So Anshuman is an open source community contributor at DEF CON Talk and a contributor, and he's been in the Valley for quite a while, doing application security for quite a while, and he's here to share his thoughts about application security and how to do things better. Anshuman, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, hi Francesco. Thank you for having me. First of all, I really appreciate it. Yeah, and I've been in the information security domain for about 13, 14 years now. Worked in both big and small companies. So I have a wide variety of experiences spanning AppSec, CloudSec, infrastructure security, automation, incident response. So I've been fortunate enough to have worked in different companies at different scales and sizes and see different problems and challenges. And yeah, I'm super happy to be here and, happy to share what my experience has taught me and hopefully learn something from you as well.
Yes. And in your experience, you've been in the industry for quite a while. You've seen, things evolving in the past years. What is your impression, especially in the last 2 or 3 years? What have you seen in terms of paradigm shift from an application security and cloud security? What do you think about the industry's going?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Francesco. So I think off late, especially in the past couple of years, with all major companies either getting breached or having some sort of incident, security has become a key organization in pretty much every place, every company, right? Like recently there was the Uber breach, which we all know of, and so I think these kind of incidents, especially in big Fortune 100 companies, sort of shows how important security is, right? No matter what industry you are in, healthcare, fintech, it is still like all an attacker needs is one entry point, and then pretty much that's game over, right? Especially when it comes to the PR and the reputation of it. So in terms of what are some of the changes that I've seen, I think I've just observed that companies are getting more cognizant, and there's more demand, there's more need for security engineers, more specifically application security and cloud security, because folks have started to understand the importance of shifting left, so to speak, right? And they've started to value the fact that the earlier you find these security holes and you fix them, the better it is for any company, right? In the long run, you don't have to deal with all the repercussions that can happen post breach or post incident. So I think that's the shift that I've seen is there are more openings now. There's more demand for security engineers. There's less shortage, right? Like there's hardly people are available. So it's good to see that, right? And it's also good to see that folks are focusing more on the core fundamentals of how is software shipped and is that happening in a secure way or not. as opposed to treating security as more like the compliance thing, right? Where you ship something and then you just want somebody to go and take a look at it, right? That approach has worked, but in this modern world where things are getting shipped, hundreds and thousands of PRs on a daily basis, that approach almost never works anymore. So that shift is good to see.
Brilliant. And I would agree that we've seen a paradigm shift with COVID, especially hitting with more application being built because the world has needed to go from a day to another to a digital form and the shift to the cloud. But what has done is fundamentally a rush onto the cloud, onto some application. And now we may be paying a little bit the price with the demand, but also have kind of exacerbated the need of specific, as you rightfully say, security engineers as early as possible to then collaborate with development team and making sure the fantastic shift left actually happened for real. But maybe in your career, in your early days, have you seen, from a business perspective, a buy-in of that approach? And if yes or no, why?
Yeah, no, I think so. In my experience of having worked in bigger companies, right? Like I worked for Atlassian, EMC. These are fairly big organizations. They have pretty well matured, like SDLC processes, and they also have pretty well matured security organizations. And obviously these products are used by customers, hundreds and thousands of customers. So there is that like sense of, are the products actually secure or not? Because the customers eventually rely on them with their data, personal information. So I think I have definitely seen the C-suites, giving importance to security, at least in the bigger organizations. Now, having said that, I've also worked in smaller companies, like smaller startups. And my experience of having worked in startups has always been a mixed bag, wherein the focus has been on, the business being profitable, the business actually bringing in revenue, and security in like some of those places are more seen as, as an operational thing. It's not really the top priority. Now, there are companies, I'm not saying every company treats security the same. There are companies that treat security as a key differentiator, right? And they use security as means of like selling their products to customers, right? They use security as a differentiator with other competitors and whatnot. But for the most part, I see security more as an like a support / operational team or organization, right? Where they're just there to make sure the audits are happening, like if you're trying to get SOC 2 or HIPAA, what have you. So I think that's what my experience has been, at least, and I can only speak from my experience. But so I think what really matters and what really makes a big difference is having a leader or having somebody on the board or have a seat, right? Where this particular leader, it can be the head of security or the CISO or who have you, they can sort of influence the CEOs and CTOs, and they can sort of explain what risk is, right? And how does security play a big role. So I think having a good, solid leader who has a seat at the round table makes a huge difference, right? If you don't have that, then yeah, it's going to be very difficult to make security a big key factor. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a brilliant point where the one you mentioned, to have a leader that actually understands and can translate that complex information that is traditionally around application security and cloud security, that is different than just, vulnerability and volumetrics, because the board is that doesn't understand those numbers. They deal with risk, as you rightfully say, the risk of not going to market, the risk of not compliance, versus the risk of security overall. And there are many security risks, not just cloud security and application security. But traditionally, for a startup, you have a product and it's built in the cloud. So 90% of the issue, unless you are, a C or a D, where you start getting, third-party supply chain management and supplier, it's rooted in there. So having a leader that supports, security as early as possible, and in a small team, is actually a good it's not that complicated. And you and I mentioned and did chat before about automation and a few other things, but you've wrote a brilliant blog on, the evolution of an application security function that is, I really appreciate it, because it wasn't you shall do this and this to the maximum level, but it's more of an evolution. And I really like that approach. So tell us a bit more about how did you land at that kind of mentality, mindset, and what guided that kind of blog, and what's your view on the first 100 days of a security role?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good question, especially for somebody who aspires to be sort of the person driving or building programs from scratch, especially product or application security. And though the blogs that I've written have mostly been from my experiences of having worked in a couple of startups and how I was able to build a product security program from the scratch, with the caveat that I'm the only one doing it, and I didn't have a lot of help, right? So uh, I think it all comes down to how do you prioritize, how do you manage risk, like you said, right? Because the goal is to eventually reduce the risk or manage risk in a way that you can communicate to your stakeholders, right? It can be your CISO, your VPs, your senior directors. So I think that's what the mental model really is can you build a program in a way that sort of reduces the risk? It does not completely get rid of it. It does not completely fix all the things, but at least it gives you a good picture of, look, these are most critical risks. Let's approach or let's start to work on some projects that will address them and then gradually make small improvements in your overall product security posture, right? So that was the idea. Now, like it all starts from having a couple of things. First is a good risk management framework that you can get your stakeholders to agree upon, right? And then you can sort of hold that risk framework as a means of how do you calculate risk for each and everything you find, and then how do you communicate what needs to be fixed versus what is okay to not be fixed. So I think that's really the first step, is having that framework established and agreed upon by all the stakeholders. Some other things that I feel are really important is just the culture in general, right? Like you're trying to make sure the products that you build are secure. Now you can't just do it overnight. There has to be a cultural shift that you have to influence, that you have to evangelize, and just kind of be the champion, right? And how do you actually do that? I think it is all about you trying to be empathetic and understanding how engineers actually commit code and how does the code get shipped and deployed in production, right? What are the pain points they have? What are the different integration points where you as a security engineer could introduce some lightweight security activity? It can be scanning, it can be a questionnaire, whatever it is, right? So identifying those integration points that doesn't block the engineers from shipping code, but actually enables, and it improves the security of the entire life cycle is really very high level strategy that you can make good improvements on, right? So spoke about risk management framework, spoke about the culture. I think the third is to really get your hands dirty by being involved in a project, right? Now it can be an engineering project, it can be anything else, but it really helps you understand more about the company, right? The people, the processes, the tools, the technologies, all the other things, right? Every company is different in their own ways. Like a company can be using Jira or Confluence or Asana, what have you, right? And whereas company B could be using a different set of tools. So you really have to think about how do you sort of combine these tools in a way that is actually helping the security data, right? Because if you don't do that, and if you try to introduce additional tools which will eventually bring more friction, that almost never works, right? So I think having a good understanding of the peoples, the processes, the technologies is really the third element in how I think about it. And then with these three things in mind, you can start building a program. You can basically divide your AppSec program into a multi-year plan, right? Where the first year you're just focusing establishing some of the foundational stuff like secure SDLC, what are the different activities, threat modeling, code reviews, all of that stuff. And then once you have those established, once you start seeing good improvements, then you can think about some of the tooling, right? Like scanning, SAST, DAST, third-party dependency scanning, all of that stuff. And then once you have that established, you can start thinking about how can you proactively sort of introduce gamification, right, within the company, so that the teams are trying to do the right thing proactively, which will eventually, show that the security risk is being reduced, right? So that's really the framework that I like to think about, and I feel like this has worked for me well because I have been able to implement these kind of programs in like a crawl, walk, run methodology. Where you start small, you observe, you have a constant feedback loop, and then you keep on iterating on it, right? And then you do more things, and then while you're doing it, you also grow your team, right? So all of this stuff is just keeping in mind you're the one-person team. Now, as you grow and as you get approval to get more resources, obviously your team is going to grow, and then you'll have more help.
No, I think it's a pragmatic, brilliant approach. It takes the startup approach of an MVP of a program with the foundation, and then demonstrating value, and then getting customer feedback that is your development community, your business, and then doubling down on that with more technology, more automation, more people, and scaling. And I've seen a lot of programs that started really wide and failed really big because you try to approach and try to address everything and every problem, and you get burned out very, very quickly because, especially in an organization with more than 300, 400 developers, that can be overwhelming. And as an output of this kind of approach, I think you touch point on a very important element, that is adapt your program and your mindset to the organizational structure and process, procedure, tool, not to force people into your way of thinking or if your tooling, but actually adapting the delivery of problem in the tools, in the backlog where engineers are actually working and looking at. Because, let's be honest, security bugs are just bugs, are just problems that need to be solved. And, technology debt and security debt are just two engineering debt. They can both live in a Jira, Slack, ServiceNow, spreadsheet, whatever tool you use, ultimately. But as a security professional, sometimes we lose that information that, we there to serve the development community, not the other way around.
Yes, absolutely.
This episode is brought to you by the generosity of Phoenix Security Limited. Phoenix helps startups and enterprises solve complex software security supply chain visibility by leveraging the power of correlation and contextualization. Phoenix platform connects to your repositories, scanners, and cloud, correlates all the information, and provides you with a prioritized list of vulnerabilities that need to be addressed first. Discover how Phoenix Security helps CISOs and developers remove friction and maximize the use of DevSecOps professionals at phoenix.security. Phoenix Security. Correlate, contextualize, and act on risk with one click.
Maybe a question for you in terms of, you mentioned tooling, scanning, actionability, risk, but in all this kind of way and process, what have you seen in terms of pen testing, red teaming, and bug bounty? Because that's the traditional little bit, not shift left, but, fixing or verifying if you're more mature. What's your opinion about, verifying security and how you have experienced that, and what did work, what didn't work?
So I think the way to approach this, or at least what I think we should approach this, is sort of to not overdo one piece of thing, right? And just do all the things, but in balance, and do it in a way that all of these different scanning and different activities actually complement each other, right? I'll give an example. Hopefully that'll put things into more perspective. But so let's say, right, you have an application which is mission critical, right? It deals with customer information that is extremely sensitive, and you can't just afford to have critical vulnerabilities in this application, right? Now, you could be doing a wide variety of things even before the application is deployed, like threat modeling, code reviews. You could be scanning the code base, like SaaS tools, right? You could sort of deploy this in a staging environment, and you could run scanners against it, right? So you could be doing all of that, but that does not give you a guarantee or give you 100% confidence that your application does not have any critical issues, right? That is just not possible. Software will have bugs, and that's the reality. You just have to deal with it. What you can do is you can do a multitude of things and approach it in a way that you're focusing on the right things and you're reducing the risk where it matters the most, right? That's really important. So in other words, while you could be doing all of those activities which I just explained, you could also have a bug bounty program for this particular application, right? Now, again, starting a bug bounty program has been very controversial, and rightfully so, because I feel bug bounties just came in the scene a few years ago, and people, really jumped onto it without really understanding the pros and cons, without really understanding the right approach of how do you even start a bug bounty program. Now, I've been on both sides. I've been as a researcher myself, where I've reported bugs to a wide variety of companies, and I've been rewarded. I've also been on the other side, where I've ran programs for big companies, and I've seen those reports, and I've understood the pain points, right? I've seen the entire process. I think bug bounties is a really good and effective way of getting good signals of, like some, and especially finding low-hanging fruits, first of all, and then B, verifying that all the HDLC activities that you are doing, right, like threat modeling, code reviews, whether they actually are giving you value or not. Because if you do end up finding a critical issue via a bug bounty researcher, you know for a fact that there's something broken in your process, right? And then you can improve on it. So I think if you treat bug bounties as that way of just kind of having some sort of security assurance and verification, like you mentioned, I think you can, it is, you can't really compare the value that you can get out of it. Now, how do you go about implementing a bug bounty program is really important, because you have to keep in mind the scope, right? Like, what is it that you want the researchers to look into, and what are the rewards that you're giving out to attract the most brilliant hackers, right? Because if you are giving out $50 for a critical issue, I mean, you might as well not have that program in the first place, because I can for sure tell you that most of the good hackers that you want to be hacking on a program, they won't even be attracted towards it, right?
Or they pay just, or they run just a security scanner.
Yeah,
In the best case
exactly.
scenario.
So you have to make sure you have the right incentives. You define the right scopes. You're actually getting value out of it, right? So if you run a bug bounty program in this way, yes, it can be awesome. You can get a lot of value. And then you can follow the bug bounty program by hiring an external third-party pen testing firm that can come and take a look at it, right? So, like, overall, the TLDR of here is, don't just do one activity and just keep doing that, right? Think about the overall picture. Think about the controls that you're trying to implement, right? And then how do you verify whether the controls are working as expected or not? And how can you use different kind of things to complement each other? So I think that approach will for sure give you, it'll allow you to sleep at night, first of all. And then you can be fairly certain that, you've had multiple folks to look at it, you've applied different activities, so you have a good signal of how secure an application is. So that's my thought.
No, I think it's brilliant. The thing that you said enables you to sleep at night, because the additional assurance is probably one of the best signals, but also a way to demonstrate and assure that the board have done enough due diligence, not just internally with application security, program of work, tooling, but also validate. And on the other side, I think I like one other aspect that you mentioned, that, doing it properly as a bug bounty program, because if you give bad reward, you receive a lot of garbage, and a good program of work that could deliver good quality ends up being just noisy and pointless. And the third aspect that I really love about what you mentioned is the scope. So you can't just cover a blanket bug bounty across the board because they are expensive, right?
Yeah.
You need to pick your battle, pick what's matter most and what are your critical assets. Where is the majority of revenue coming, and making that sure that you're not going to get affected by it.
Absolutely.
Maybe on back on the bug bounty, what are the good, stories that you've seen and the best stories that you've seen around your experience in bug bounty? Maybe something funny that happened or something dramatic without naming names, of course.
Yeah, no, yeah, this quite a. I'm trying to think without divulging too much information. Like I've seen huge successes in a bug bounty program. I've also seen huge failures. I think the most funny stories that I can think of are specifically around scope, like scoping issues, right? To give you an example, let's say a company, a big public company has started a bug bounty program, and they start off by basically saying, the scope is xyz.com, where XYZ is an actual company name.
Mm-hmm.
Now they don't really know what that entails, right? What they hope that they can achieve from this program is, find all the critical issues in all the domains or what have you, right? But what ends up happening here is these bug bounty researchers, they run their fancy tools and their chained automation attacks and whatnot, and they find these weird, obscure like subdomains, let's say 1.2.3.xyz.com, which the company might have no idea about, right? And then they realize that this particular system hosted on this like obscure subdomain is basically something that is exposed on the internet and that can get you access to the internal infrastructure, right? So those are the kind of stories that I think are really funny and impactful because they highlight a few things, right? One, a company doesn't really know what the actual attack surface is. They think they do, but unfortunately, in the cloud world, everything changes all the time. The engineers, they might be hosting or exposing something on the internet, and the security team has no idea about, right? So this kind of highlights this big gap where you have to be continuously scanning your external attack surface, because if you don't, you're going to end up finding these kind of issues. The second thing is,
if you're lucky, you find it.
yes, absolutely, because it is a competition at the end of the day, right? Whoever finds first gets rewarded. So yeah, you have to be fast, you have to be accurate, all of those things, right? The second thing I wanted to mention here was the fact that you're starting this program and you're saying, look, we're going to reward $5,000 for all the critical issues, and the scope is xyz.com, right? But then you end up realizing, look, we don't really care about this obscure domain as much, right? We care about the application that our customers use the most. We want to give $5,000 for any critical issues found on that application only. But then you realize you scoped it so wrong, right? And then you promise the researchers that you're going to be giving $5,000 for any critical issues. I think that's the other learnings that teams have is you have to know what the external attack surface is, and then you have to scope it accordingly as well. Because you can't be giving out $5,000 for critical issues in all the infrastructure that belongs to the company. That's just not possible, because you're going to have exposures that you didn't know about. You're going to have exposures that you don't really care about as much because the risk is not as much, right? And then you're going to have exposures that are really in mission critical applications. So I think those two like sort of stories where the scope is not clear, and then that creates a lot of confusion between the researchers and the programs, and then that just kind of spoils the reputation of a program, because once a researcher goes and tweets about it, I found RCE on this website and the scope said they would give $5,000, but the team is saying they won't because it is not as risky. So that is just a very bad reputational wise, right? And then just the fact that if you don't know,
it's slightly bit illegal and a tiny bit illegal, I guess.
yes, absolutely. I think for sure, because there's certain laws. Like again, I am no expert here, but I know there are certain laws within the United States that prohibits anybody to sort of do any sort of hacking or scanning, right? Unless you get explicit approvals. I think that is changing where there's something called safe harbor law or something, right? Where companies are promising the researchers that they won't pursue any legal lawsuits against researchers if they, sort of just kind of be ethical about it and they disclose anything that's fine. So yeah, that has been my experience. Again, I have also seen programs that are really successful, but I've also seen programs that just kind of start and then close out in like 6 months because they don't have any money left, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think you touch on a very important point, that is scoping is a delicate balance between scoping what's important, but also, identifying lateral movement or new things that pop up that you might not be aware is, you're trying to tell a hacker how to hack without spending too much money. It's a bit of a challenge. But I think you touched on a point that was particularly significant. As long as you do the legwork to actually continuously scanning your external surface, you prioritize the work. So it has a time and place, bug bounting, red teaming, or pen testing, and a scope. But you need to make sure that you do all the other activities. Otherwise, it might be too expensive to actually just finding things from a pen test. And then you have to solve it, because at that point in time where you identify a critical vulnerability is known, even there are rules and regulation, but then at the other time, you have to fix it and you have to go back to the development team and they have to remember which line of code did we did yesterday and where did we put that library? I don't remember what I ate this morning.
I just thought of another example where I've seen smaller companies start off with a bug bounty program. They start off with building a red team, right? Without building any sort of product security or security assurance kind of activity. What ends up happening in those cases is you get a lot of value initially from your bug bounty programs, from your red team. You'll find a lot of criticals, but then what happens after that? You have to get them fixed in order to continue getting value from them, right? But then how do you get fixed if you don't have a good solid security DLC program defined, right? So you need to think about the first principles, right? Yes, you can get value from them, but you don't just want to do it once ad hoc, right? You should be doing it on an ongoing basis. But then in order to support that, you need all these matured processes being defined. So yeah, I think that's the mindset that I've seen kind of differ from different companies. So some companies are successful, like some are not.
Great. And I think that brings us back to the original point that you said, a good security leader understands the time and place where things happen. Mm-hmm. And that's why I really like the blog and the evolution. You don't put, the pen test in front of the cart. You actually put it at the end of the cart so that you do all the stuff that prepare you to deal with defects and incidents in the right way. And then you can really have a powerful, application security or vulnerability management program and across the board. And I use vulnerability management across the board because I think we misuse the term vulnerability management. I think we think vulnerability management equal patching, where it's not anymore like that. Right?
It's very different.
Yeah. I think the industry is changing. Is getting to the grapple of the new and modern way we build application. The ownership shift that is not anymore infrastructure team that look at for laptops, application security team that fix bugs. It's all into one, and everybody's responsible for the full stack. So yes. I think organizations are changing. But before we close off with these thoughts, do you want to leave our audience with a positive message? We have this tradition that we don't like to end up in the doom and gloom. And I think this was a really positive conversation. So in itself, the podcast is a positive message, but leave our audience with a positive closure point.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, Francesco, I think this was a good conversation. I don't think the situation is doom and gloom, at least from the application security standpoint. I think things are improving. I think companies are heading towards the right direction. They're heading the right folks, right? And folks know what is the right thing to do, right? So yeah, I think to end this, I would just say that um, you know just be empathetic, because if you start thinking about how an engineer lives their day-to-day life, and what are some of the struggles they have, and how you can actually help them, that will help you gain empathy, right? And then if you take this empathetic attitude towards solving these security challenges, I think you're going to have far more success in any sort of program, whether it is product, application, cloud security. If you don't have empathy, you're basically going back to where it was, where folks just kind of hate security folks. They're intimidated by them. They think whenever they hear from security folks, it's always going to create problems. It is about problems. So I think that is changing for sure. At least I've seen that, and I think if just folks kind of build empathy and sort of approach it that way, it will end up in a positive note for sure.
Brilliant. Anshuman, thank you so much for bringing that out. I think empathy, preventing burnout and preventing conflict, I think is really important in our industry. On the positive notes, we've seen the organization changing, the Shift Left initiative, the Security Champion initiative, the Empathy initiative, I think is really starting to take place and delivering the result that it promised at the very beginning. But I really appreciate you coming on the show. I thought we had brilliant conversation outside, and it had to be shared with our audience. A last point for our audience, where they can find more of you, where they can follow your blog or the resources where you talk, where they can see you on the web.
Yeah, you can find my blog at anshumanbhartiya.com. I can provide the link. You can also find me on Twitter. I go by Anshuman_BH. And yeah, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to share ideas, collaborate. Security is something I'm really passionate about. So, always happy to have those conversations.
Thank you so much. And thank you for contributing also to open source projects that are the backbone of a lot of security program, especially in startup way. And is one of my pet peeves to actually encourage the use of open source more and more and to contribute back and give back to the community. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Everybody, start doing your program and application security in baby steps. Don't throw bug bounty to everything, and stay safe out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcast and post it on social media tagging Cybersecurity Cloud Podcast for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card. Discover other episodes at www.cybersecuritypodcast.com.